Chapter 1. We all know that something is terribly wrong, a glitch in the matrix. Our society is built on a foundation that is crumbling, and the consequences are all around us. Marriage, once the bedrock of our civilization, has been at the very least mortally wounded. Like any good murder mystery, we are left with a burning question. Who is responsible for this heinous crime? There is no obvious single culprit, no smoking gun. Instead, we find a tangled web of deceit, a conspiracy of forces, strange bedfellows that have slowly, insidiously eroded the foundations of marriage from within. The future of our society, the well-being of our children, and the very survival of our civilization depend on our ability to solve this mystery. To understand what happened, we need to perform a sort of forensic examination. It appears from close examination, this crime needed an intimate inside co-conspirator to exact the most fatal blow to the head of marriage. What happened to our marriages? What changed from a time when greater than 90% of all marriages lasted a lifetime to what we are living in now, when almost 70% of all marriages fail? Chapter 2. The Murder Suspects. The list of suspects may surprise you. Some point accusing fingers at the rise of secularism, the decline of religious faith, and the relentless march of narcissism. Others blame the breakdown of traditional gender roles, the pressures of modern life, or the clandestine influence of social media algorithms. To truly understand this killer, especially since marriage is still on life support, we must look beyond the surface, beyond the easy answers and convenient scapegoats. A closer look reveals that this crime required inside access. At the very least, a partner willing to acquiesce to help access the foundational, beating heart of holy matrimony. Chapter 3. The Shifting Sands of Desire. The institution of marriage, once a shimmering beacon of hope and aspiration, now flickers dimly in the collective consciousness of young people. Unlike their parents and grandparents who survived 2 world wars and still managed to remain married, many young people today approach it with a mixture of apathy, apprehension, and even outright disdain. This shift in perception is a seismic cultural shift, a fundamental realignment of values. It's a new world order, bringing with it some of the most absurd notions that shock the conscience, notions contrary to our nation's founding and opposed to everything we know to be good and holy. The very idea of lifelong commitment has been relegated to the dusty attic of outdated ideals, like girls never kiss on the first date, or children should be seen and not heard. In its place, we find a relentless pursuit of individual fulfillment, a narcissistic obsession with self-discovery, leaving a vacuous hole in the soul of this nation. Relationships are no longer seen as sacred unions or covenants, but rather as contractual agreements ruled by the human heart's most fickle, fleeting feelings. Contracts to be negotiated and renegotiated at whim. Contracts in place of holy covenants, exchanging a truth for a lie. While previous generations successfully navigated life's trouble with a spouse they learned to love and trust, we find this generation adrift in a sea of fleeting connections, perpetually seeking but never truly finding the deep, abiding love that their ancestors have known and their hearts so desperately crave. Chapter 4. The Game. A Battlefield of Misunderstanding. At closer inspection, modern dating scene is more like a war than a game. It has devolved into a treacherous minefield of misrepresentation, miscommunication, manipulation, and outright warfare between the sexes. It seems as if, by design, it pits man against woman, sowing seeds of opposition, mistrust, and adversarial dynamic, rather than helping one find their trusted lifelong soulmate. Men and women often find themselves locked in a shallow power struggle, each vying for the upper hand. This adversarial dynamic is fueled by societal pressures, unrealistic expectations, and rapidly disseminated by the social media algorithms. Men, bombarded with images of airbrushed perfection, stoking the fires of desire. Women, taught to view their sexuality as their primary source of power, objectify both themselves using all the expensive makeup they can muster, along with the most sophisticated AI media filters, with the idea to get attention of their potential suitors. The game, as it is currently played, is a rigged game, one where both men and women emerge as casualties. The emphasis is on sexualized images rather than fostering a deeper caring for the prospective life partner. it seems as if it is designed to foster an adversarial relationship, a sort of tit for tat between man and woman, right from the start. Chapter 5. The women's liberation movement, whatever its intentions, has contributed to the very problems it ostensibly sought to solve. While women have achieved significant progress in some areas, it has also undermined the foundations of marriage and family. In their quest for liberation, many women have embraced a form of individualism that has left them feeling isolated and unfulfilled. The traditional roles that once provided structure and purpose have been cast aside, replaced by a dizzying array of choices, expectations, and bizarre behavior. All of this started by a coven of women in a religious cult back in the year 1848. For more on this, I recommend the book Occult Feminism: The Secret History of Women's Liberation, written by Rachel Wilson. The modern woman is often torn between her desire for a successful career and her longing for a fulfilling family life. She often does not find out that she cannot do both well, career and family, until it is too late. Unfortunately, as we will clearly see, the family ends up with the short end of the stick. What is important to know is that this brand of feminism is voluntary. That is, women do not need to follow the cult of feminism in order to be feminine. With more information coming into light, we see that independent women are choosing the natural order, which is designed for our welfare and not for evil, to give a future and a hope. Chapter 6. Progress, we are told, is a good thing. But progress, like any powerful force, can be a double-edged sword. The feminist movement, in its zeal to dismantle patriarchal structures, set in motion a chain of events with far-reaching consequences for marriage. Traditional roles that provided order and stability were placed squarely in the crosshairs, leaving both men and women feeling uncertain. Women, newly liberated, were encouraged to pursue careers and lean into their sexuality. Men, meanwhile, grappled with their newfound obsolescence, unsure of their place in a world where their traditional roles as provider and protector were no longer valued. Chapter 7. The modern woman is often portrayed as a superhero, capable of juggling a high-powered career with motherhood and a fulfilling social life. This image, while aspirational, is also deeply misleading and harmful. Very few women can truly have it all without sacrificing their health, their children's well-being, and all too often, their mental health. The attempt to live up to this impossible ideal often leaves women feeling exhausted, resentful, and in poor mental health. In fact, a study by Harvard Medical School published in 2011 showed that nearly 23% of women in their 40s and 50s are taking antidepressants. Women are prescribed antidepressants at an alarming rate of 2.5 times more than their male cohorts. Along the same lines, the effect on children in daycare are significant. In a study by M. Baker, J. Gruber, and K. Milligan, The Long-Run Impacts of a Universal Childcare Program, November 8, 2018. Young adults, ages 12 to 20, the study showed general health and life satisfaction, indicated that negative social-emotional outcomes with exposure to the daycare program were present, and they persisted into young adulthood. The most alarming found a sharp and contemporaneous increase in criminal behavior for children exposed to a daycare program compared to their peers in other contexts. There was an increase of 19% in the average rate of criminal indictments and an increase of 22% in the average rate of criminal convictions. This impact increasing the likelihood of criminal behavior was demonstrated to be greater for boys and for those who already had elevated behavioral problems. So what we have here is women trying to do it all, often describing themselves as fierce, feeling as though their husbands are like a third child and treating him accordingly. At the same time, men, confused about their roles, struggle to navigate their own set of challenges and expectations. Chapter 8. One of the most significant casualties of women's empowerment has been the role of the father. As women have taken on the role of primary breadwinner, many men have been relegated to a more peripheral role within the family. Men, deprived of their traditional role as protectors and providers, often struggle to find meaning and purpose, retreating into seemingly vain activities such as video games, watching sports, and playing golf. Children, meanwhile, are more often deprived of the unique love and guidance that only a father can provide. The absence of a strong, positive father figure can leave a lasting void in a child's life, causing irreparable harm to the child throughout their entire lifespan, potentially robbing society of their otherwise valuable contributions. Chapter 9. The family, once considered the bedrock of society, is now a house divided against itself. Men and women, once united by their complementary roles, now often find themselves on opposing sides of a cultural divide. This divide is exacerbated by popular culture, which often portrays men as bumbling fools and women as hyper-competent or a frazzled, hot mess. The result is a climate of suspicion and distrust, where communication breaks down and relationships crumble. So you see, the adversarial relationship, which started right from the beginning utilizing the social rules of the game of dating as perpetuated by social media, continues and reigns supreme today. Chapter 10. The modern man finds himself caught in a cultural crossfire, bombarded with conflicting messages about masculinity. Traditional notions of masculinity have been eroded by a culture that values sensitivity and emotional expressiveness. This shift has left many men feeling adrift, uncertain of their place in a world where their traditional roles are no longer valued. At home, men are often relegated to a subservient role, their authority undermined by a culture that defers to the mother's judgment. Chapter 11. The Happy Wife, Happy Life Fallacy. The old adage reveals a disturbing truth about power dynamics in modern relationships. Men, conditioned to believe their primary role is to keep their wives happy, often suppress their own needs and desires. Women, meanwhile, may become accustomed to a level of deference that can be difficult to sustain. Every time a man defers his decisions to a woman, a little more of her respect for him is lost. Like a sandy beach in stormy weather, her respect for her man erodes, along with her feelings of love and affection. The happy wife, happy life philosophy ultimately sets up both partners for disappointment, creating a dynamic where true oneness, intimacy, and emotional connection are elusive. Chapter 12. The Flight from Responsibility. Many men are opting out of marriage, prioritizing careers, personal pursuits, or casual relationships. This is often seen as immaturity, but it can be a rational response to a risky cultural climate. These men, being left alone, floating adrift, often find an older divorcee, a so-called cougar, who, leaving a relationship where her husband has been desperately trying to win her love, while her lack of respect for her husband has grown to the point of no return. She leaps at the chance of feeling young again, alluring the attentions of a younger man. Ironically, she passionately gives the young man all the attention she never was willing to give her own husband, who loved her. Unfortunately, she will ultimately feel guilt and shame over this sort of affair, and will not realize this until it's too late. It seems no surprise that women are taking antidepressants more now than in any time in the past. Meanwhile, men are thinking, why enter a contract where roles are ill-defined, authority undermined, and happiness contingent on shifting expectations ever-changing at a woman's emotional feeling du jour? Or even worse than that. They think, I may find myself years down the road being abandoned by my wife, having to pay child support for children I'm not allowed to see. Many seek to go their own way and define their own paths and find fulfillment outside traditional marriage, finding this commitment too risky in this modern-day battle of the sexes. These cultural forces are impacting how men view marriage, questioning its relevance in the 21st century. Chapter 13. Men going their own way. The consequences of this cultural shift are far-reaching and profound. As more and more men opt out of marriage or delay it indefinitely, women are left to grapple with the consequences of their increased independence. While many women celebrate their plethora of life options and embrace the opportunities that come with financial independence and greater control over their own destinies, others find themselves struggling with a sense of loneliness, a longing for connection, and a deep-seated fear that they have somehow missed out on the very thing they were told they didn't need: a loving and supportive partner. This disillusionment is further compounded by the realities of modern dating, where the relentless pursuit of instant gratification, fueled by dating apps and a hookup culture that often prioritizes physical intimacy over emotional connection and oneness, can leave even the most confident and independent woman feeling used, disposable, and deeply uncertain about her own worth. The seeds of disillusionment are sown, not just in the hearts of men who feel marginalized and misunderstood, but also in the hearts of women who are beginning to question the promises of a feminist theology that has often left them feeling more alone and unfulfilled than ever before. Young women are now beginning to think that true feminism is being more feminine, rather leaning into their femininity and embracing the natural order created by God. Let's face it, women have proven they are talented enough to excel in the workplace, but some women are asking if they should use their talents for a vain sense of accomplishment. Women are now getting the message that men do not care about a woman's career success. Women are waking up, are asking themselves, are my abilities more valuable to apply at home, where I can help build a lasting inheritance for me and my family? They are looking around and see that, although they achieved great things in their career, it is empty and vacuous, compared to women who have built a family that will prosper for generations to come. That true generational wealth is to build a family with their other self, their husband. That being one in mind, body, spirit, and purpose with their husband will yield a lasting, infinitely more satisfying achievement in the context of family. Could it be that this is where joy and happiness reside, in a loving home, being one with a loving husband in a house full of children, rather than ruling in a corporate boardroom like a boss lady? Chapter 14. The murder of marriage is not solely the doing of radical social movements or shifting cultural tides. A silent partner in crime lurks in the shadows of a most unlikely place, the modern evangelical church. Pastors occasionally preach fiery sermons against divorce. However, in daily practice, willful ignorance and leniency prevails. Specifically, a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy regarding divorce has become the norm. That is, leaders don't ask and couples don't tell of their often sordid history of the previous marriages. For many pastors, they accept a piece of paper from a state court as good enough that the marriage is over, when in reality, according to the Bible, marriage is for life. Just like the vows say, until death do you part. Hey pastors, know this. That willful ignorance is not an excuse for you to be congregating with adulterers. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 is clear on this matter. Churches, grappling with declining attendance, hesitate to take a strong stance. If they give a couple a hard time for an improper remarriage, then they would likely just pick up and go to another church, taking their volunteerism and their weekly donations with them. As we can clearly see, the church has an accountability problem, making it difficult to employ biblical church discipline in a consistent manner. The church, meant to be a beacon of hope, for many reasons like this has become a silent enabler of broken marriages.
Chapter 15. This unspoken complicity in the erosion of marriage has had a devastating impact on men. Seeking guidance from pastors and fellow church members, men are often met with platitudes about loving your wife as Christ loved the church. They are essentially told to give in, sacrificing themselves, surrendering their ideas, wishes, and desires for their family. They tell the men just like Christ died for the church, men should sacrifice their wills for their family. The problem with this is that pastors ignore the surrounding passages. Let's take a close look what Ephesians chapter 5 verse 25 says.
Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it.
So pastors take this verse and grab the ball and run like Forrest Gump with this verse. However, they miss the verse before this one. So Ephesians 5 verse 22 says,
Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord.
So, Christian, it is like this. Christ died for us, the perfect sacrifice. However, understand this, that he never gave up his headship. He remains the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and he is the head of his church. And so the husband is the head of the Christian home as well. Thus, the entire passage reads as follows.
Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, So let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it.
When pastors misrepresent the Bible, telling men that they need to just give in to the happy wife, happy life myth, they are essentially usurping the husband's headship, even cutting off the head of the house, leaving the proverbial superwoman to dominate the home and relationship, and thus leaving the home in an unnatural disorder. This is what they call today a toxic environment. You see, since God designed marriage and he placed the man at the head of the house, any other order than this, yes ma'am, I said any other order than this, it will bring chaos and disorder into the family. These anti-male sentiments from pastors ring hollow to men who feel unheard and disrespected. The church's indiscriminate removal of the head of Christian families brings to mind a familiar narrative when we look at the story of the execution of John the Baptist. You see, John, being a champion of truth and marriage for life, rebuked Herod for taking his brother's wife, Herodias. John, after being jailed by Herod for some time, upon that fateful occasion, the daughter of Herodias danced and pleased Herod. He then swore unto her a request she could ask for up to half his kingdom. Then, of course, we know Herodias ordered her daughter to demand the head of John the Baptist in a charger. Similarly, we see in church marriage counseling sessions, the wife often bewitches the pastor with an alluring dance, spinning tales of her husband's so-called abuse, harassment, and controlling behavior. She manages to confound the pastor, much like Herodias tricked Herod into removing the head of John the Baptist. The church, bamboozled by the wife's vain imaginations, is then persuaded to acquiesce and consent to the removal of the head of the family, thus fulfilling the epitaph of many Christian men that they should sacrifice themselves for their family like Christ did for the church. Ultimately, the wife, displaying the same spirit of Herodias, gets a religious covering for her decision to leave her family. This, of course, leaves the men feeling betrayed and abandoned by the church. Recently, a man shared with me his sense of betrayal he feels after the church enabled his divorce. He reports that he now believes that church is the most dangerous place a man can bring his family. He says, churches don't support marriage for life any longer, so when you go to church for help, inevitably the church ends up giving the rebellious spouse more reason to leave than reasons to stick it out. This erosion of trust has profound implications for the spiritual well-being of men and for the health of the church as a whole. Chapter 16. A Crisis of Faith. The modern evangelical church's response to the crisis of marriage reveals a deeper crisis of faith, a crisis of courage, conviction, and a willingness to stand firm on the unchanging truths of Scripture, even when those truths are unpopular or inconvenient. Fearful of offending, of losing members, or of being labeled as out of touch with the times, many churches have chosen to compromise on the essential doctrine of marriage for life, opening up a veritable Pandora's box of options for rebellious spouses to choose a quick exit from the marriage, rather than walking out the marriage covenant in obedience to Christ. This unwillingness to stand firm on the truth has had devastating consequences for countless individuals and families. Irreparable harm ensues as the church decides to side with the adulterous sinner rather than the spouse who was abandoned. For instance, I know a man who was abandoned by his wife for no biblical reason. His wife is now dating a guy on the ministry team at a professed Bible-believing church. This requires a willful ignorance of Romans 7:3. So then if, while her husband liveth, she be married to another man, she shall be called an adulteress. But if her husband be dead, she is free from that law, so that she is no adulteress, though she be married to another man. Pastors, you cannot get around the word shall. Shall is an absolute. She shall be called an adulteress. So men, starved for authentic leadership and guidance, are left to navigate the complexities of marriage and family life without a moral compass, without the support of pastors, leaving them vulnerable to going and making bad decisions. Decisions that will likely lead to further pain, brokenness, and disillusionment. Women, meanwhile, due to the lack of male leadership in their home, are often left feeling unsupported and overwhelmed, forced to bear the brunt of responsibility for the family's emotional and spiritual well-being. She finds out that the Superwoman myth hoisted upon her by a minority of women from times past is not cutting it. Although she is intoxicated by the newfound power of modern woman, what she really needs is a man to be a man. A husband to step up and make those tough decisions to keep the family unit from peril. She is tired of working and having to wear the pants at home as well. And children, caught in the crossfire of this cultural and spiritual battleground, are often left confused, insecure, and deeply wounded by the breakdown of their families. The church, meant to be a pillar of truth and a beacon of hope in a darkening world, has instead become a dim reflection of the very culture it is called to transform.
Chapter 17. The Wages of Silence. Edmund Burke, among others, is credited with this most profound statement. He said, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph in the world is that good men do nothing." That being said, silence of the church on these critical issues is deafening. By refusing to engage in honest, courageous conversations about the challenges facing men and women in modern marriages, the church has abdicated its responsibility to be a source of healing and restoration. This silence has come at a steep price. It has driven a wedge between men and women, fueled resentment and distrust, and contributed to the breakdown of countless families. It has also undermined the church's credibility, leaving it ill-equipped to address the very real spiritual and emotional needs of a generation, yearning for meaning, purpose, and authentic connection. The time for silence is over. The church must rediscover its prophetic voice, its willingness to speak truth to power, even when it is uncomfortable or unpopular. It must offer more than empty platitudes and superficial solutions, instead providing men and women with the tools, resources, and support they need to build strong, healthy, and God-honoring marriages. It is time to restore the natural order God designed marriage to be at its best. The husband at the head of his family, as Christ, is the head of the church. The future of our families, our communities, and our nation depends on it. Chapter 18. The Verdict. The evidence is overwhelming. The murder of marriage, this once sacred institution, stands as a chilling testament to the destructive forces unleashed upon our society. Like a jury carefully weighing the testimony, we have examined the suspects, dissected their motives, and traced their actions back to the scene of the crime. Feminism, in its misguided pursuit of equality, bears a heavy burden of responsibility. Its ostensibly well-intentioned but ultimately flawed ideology has created a climate of resentment and distrust between the sexes, leaving both men and women feeling lost, alone, and deeply unfulfilled. Honestly, it remains obvious to any objective observer that women's liberation has ironically liberated most women from their happiness. The modern evangelical church, in its failure to stand firm on biblical truths, and its eagerness to appease a culture increasingly hostile to traditional values, stands condemned as an accomplice to this crime. Its silence has been deafening, its complicity a betrayal of the very people it was called to serve. The verdict is clear. Marriage, as God ordained it, as our forefathers understood it, lies shattered, a casualty of our collective hubris, our unwillingness to confront uncomfortable truths, and our insatiable appetite for self-gratification. Chapter 19. A Glimmer of Hope. The human heart yearns for more than fleeting pleasures and empty promises. Deep within lies a longing for enduring love and commitment. This longing cannot be extinguished. It reminds us we were created for something greater. The path forward will not be easy. It requires challenging cultural narratives and returning to timeless wisdom. Men must rediscover their strength and capacity to lead their families. Women must embrace their nurturing hearts and desire for partnership. They need to obey their husbands just like they obey their boss at work. The church must become a beacon of hope and a champion for marriage. They must embrace the natural order of marriage in just the way God designed it. Women were happier when men were men. Women were women and children were children. The future may seem bleak, but despair is not an option. The human spirit is capable of extraordinary resilience and renewal. A new dawn awaits where love, commitment, and sacrifice guide us. Marriage, redeemed and restored, reclaims its place as society's cornerstone.